I was home, working at the computer, preparing for my employer's annual financial meeting being held the following week when it came. Its little innocuous melody, more an annoyance than a harbinger of heart-bursting pain and brain-melting fury. I didn't think anything of the small pop-up informing me I had a new email. I finished what I was doing before bothering with the email. It was maybe an hour before I got around to opening it. It was addressed to me, by name, but it had some weird, obviously fake sender's email address. The subject line had 3 words, view or else. Or else what? They'd spam me? There was no other message, but the email did have a file attached that my email service identified as video. I was ready to delete the email, then something stopped me. Call it a sixth sense, because right before hitting the delete button I asked myself, why not look at it? Maybe it's one of my friends who'd sent a video of some hot babe they'd gone out with and screwed. It wouldn't have been the first time. My friends had sent me videos before, just to rub my face in the fact they were still single and free. Yet, the strange sender address should have clued me, and I knew better than to download the video, but with a slight grin on my face, I clicked to view the video. The video player opened as soon as the download was complete, and after a moment of dark blankness, it began to play. It was a hot babe. It was my wife's beautiful face staring intently into the camera, her luscious lips painted red and smiling seductively. Her long, wavy hair was loose and splayed across her fair shoulders, framing her face in a wreath of ginger-colored sexiness, while her green eyes sparkled with naughty amusement. Hello, my dear husband. I hope you're watching because you really don't want to miss what I'm about to show you. I began to get excited. My wife, Sheila, out of state on a lengthy business trip, had been gone nearly 2 weeks and might not return for another 2 weeks, depending on how quickly they tied up things with her company's client. It wasn't unusual for her to send me photos of herself in various sorts of undress, or for us to video chat while she was out of town. This was new, however. Oddly, she'd never sent me a video before. The other strange things were the fake sender's email address she used, and that she didn't write a message with the email, but I was too engrossed as to what was coming next that I didn't give it much thought. Regardless, as I fleetingly thought of the strangeness of the email, whatever my wife had planned for me to see and enjoy had my excitement rising. I quickly forgot about the peculiarity of it all. Now, Joe, take a seat before I start. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I chuckled in gleeful anticipation. I was already getting horny hearing my wife's soft, throaty voice. Are you sitting? A moment's pause. Good. Let the show begin. Sheila declared with the cry of a sexy carnival barker. I could understand panning the camera in and out, using a remote, but how did the camera, that I assumed was either laying on a table or mounted on a tripod, move to the side of its own accord? As I watched with a rapidly growing suspicion, the camera stopped moving, and a few seconds later a young guy steps into view. In confused disbelief, I thought, what the hell is going on? With the camera's new angle, I could now see the entire length of the bed, which the guy quickly lay upon. Sheila slowly scooted down until she lay on her back next to the man. My wife, the love of my life, the future mother of our children, my best friend, the one I knew I could have grown old with, was with another man. I wanted to stop watching, to tear my eyes away. I wanted to delete the video and pretend I'd never seen it, but I couldn't. I sat there dumbfounded, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do no more than writhe in anguish as uninvited tears began to run down my cheeks. Why was Sheila doing this to us? Why? What did I do to her for her to be so heartlessly cruel? Was this some messed up joke? The man started having sex with her. Soon, Sheila was screaming words she had never used when we made love. I think that's when my heart gave up the ghost and I began to sob in great heaves of despair. I couldn't see the video anymore as my eyes filled with a blinding drench of tears. I don't know how long I sat there in soul-wrenching agony as the video played. It wasn't until I heard my wife, no, not my wife anymore, just some 304 named Sheila, call my name that I became aware of what she said. Joe? Joe? Are you still there? I hope you are. I really do. I hope you saw everything. How he satisfied me like you can't. He did things that you have never been able to do for me. How hot he made me. Hotter than you could ever make me with your little Willie. I hope you saw all that, because that's the last time you'll ever have the pleasure of my body or my heart. And he's been getting it since I've been here. I'm filing for divorce as soon as I get home. You cheating a-hole? Yes, that's right. I know about your little affair with that blonde-headed bitch. So don't go playing all innocent on me, you slimy worm. Oh yes, if you aren't out of my home by the time I get into town, I'll call the cops and have you charged with assaulting me. Have a miserable life. Shithead. What was she talking about? What blonde? When I pummeled my addled brain, but nothing came to the forefront. I had no idea what she was talking about. I'd never cheated on her. Unless it was that one girl I dated in college. She was a blonde, but that was over 20 years ago, and a few years before I'd met Sheila. Why bring it up now? One last thing, Joe. When you downloaded the video, a little thing called a Trojan entered your computer with the video. In a few seconds, this video and your computer will be so much crap. Just like you, a whole. So, forget about trying to save it and using it against me, shithead. I heard her laugh, a harsh, terrible sound of triumph just as the video went dark. When the video stopped playing, my computer, as well protected as it was with the best anti-everything money could buy, suddenly rebooted on its own. But when it tried to load up the operating system, it couldn't find it. Shit, my reports, my meeting, I'd save them to the hard drive before downloading and running the video, and if what Sheila said was true about the Trojan, everything was corrupted to uselessness. Whatever hurt and betrayal I'd felt before by Sheila's actions was shoved rudely aside and replaced by a rush of mindless rage. She was going to pay, and pay big time. I would screw her up until the only thing left of her would be a vague, dissipating memory. I moved out of our house the next day, not because she demanded it, but because I didn't want to live in a house where I wasn't sure that it hadn't been used as a sex cave. I thought about staying and confronting Sheila, but after I regained a slightly calmer frame of mind the following morning, I knew that in a face-to-face encounter I'd probably lose it. She'd end up in the morgue and I'd end up in jail. The bitch wasn't worth it. Still raging, and sure that my emotional state would be apparent for a while, I decided not to go to the office anytime soon. I called my office and told them I was going to work at home to finish the reports for the meeting. My boss wasn't too happy about it, but he finally gave in, as I remained adamant in my desire. I spent most of the following day packing what I could of what was mine, moving it out of the house and dropping it off at a storage unit, then staying at a cheap motel. I'd stay at the motel until I could find the time to locate an apartment. I had no real hope for my computer, but I knew a IT guy, Steve, a freelancer that my office used from time to time. I explained what had happened, although not about the video content, telling him I needed my saved files. He didn't promise anything, but stated that he might be able to recover something. If nothing else, he could wipe the hard drive and install the latest operating system, and I'd have the use of my computer. He said to give him a week, and it might not be cheap. I agreed and told him I'd drop off the computer that afternoon. I began working on my reports for the meeting, using the red rage in my heart and the maelstrom of fury in my mind to fuel my grim determination. I worked day and night, with little regard to sleep. Coffee is my friend, and eating only when the pangs in my stomach became too painful to ignore. It wasn't easy, but little by little, over the next few days, I managed to recreate most of the report from written notes and memory. By the time I finished, I was still furious, but my fury had been blunted by an equal amount of weariness. There were a few things missing that I had saved to my computer. Although not inconsequential, the missing elements wouldn't adversely affect my report too much. By the start of the following week, and 2 days before the meeting, as I was reviewing what I had completed, thinking my report lacked a professional finish, Steve called telling me he managed to save all my work. I could have kissed him at that point. Then he said something else that brought the first smile to my face in days. Although, looking up as I spoke to Steve, seeing myself in the motel room's wall mirror, it was not an especially pleasant smile. Joe, I found some video data. Some of it's corrupted beyond recovery, but I think I can retrieve the rest of it. Do you want me to try? Or forget it, and just clean the hard drive and install the operating system? If he could recover the video, and if there was enough of it, then I might have the last horrible laugh on Sheila. However, I didn't want to share that Sheila had cucked me. It wasn't so much I was ashamed or embarrassed, I was far beyond that, but I felt the fewer the people that knew of the video's existence, the better it was for me in the upcoming divorce proceedings. And a hellish surprise for Sheila. Sure, try to recover it if you can, Steve. But, will you have to view the video to recover it? Nah, I don't think so. Why? I thought a moment for a plausible explanation, before replying, well, no reason, really. Hesitating briefly, I continued, it's a little embarrassing. The video is of a fishing trip when I caught one of the largest trouts ever. I was doing a silly little jig in the boat when Steve cut me off before I could continue my tall fish tale. No, I won't have to see it. Although he didn't say it at the end of his sentence, I imagined hearing it anyway, thank God. Okay, well, recover what you can and let me know as soon as you have something. Sure thing. Anything else, boss man? Asked Steve, in a bored tone. Yeah. If you do recover it, can you save the video to a thumb drive? No problemo. I'll start on it right away. Great. Call me when it's ready. Also, email me the reports you recovered. I'll drop off a check tomorrow. Thanks, Steve. I really meant my thanks to him. He just didn't know the truth of it. I wasn't happy, far from it, but I did feel grimly satisfied. I would be able to complete my report and maybe, just maybe, screw over Sheila. The pain of her betrayal was still raw, but with a great effort of will, I pushed it down and kept going. I don't know why Sheila had to lie about me having an affair just so she could go out and screw some shithead, or maybe to her it wasn't a lie. Maybe she did think I was screwing around. It's possible someone at her work filled her idiotic head with stupid ideas of my supposed infidelity. Or it could be one of her friends. Either way, it wasn't that important to me to find out who said what. The deed was done and Sheila and I were through. Looking the story from Sheila's side. Hey girl, what's up? How did it go in Boston? Did you land another big one? Asked my coworker, Ophelia, as we met for lunch the week after my return. Hi, girlfriend. Yeah, it went well and I landed a very big one. I replied, silently laughing at the image of John's big one. My lover of my last 3 weeks in Boston. Ophelia hadn't a clue. I was still very hurt and angry at what Joe had done, and I knew the feelings weren't going to go away. I just hoped he was hurt worse by what I had done to him than I was by his cheating. If it hadn't been for Amber cluing me in, I'd still be the trusting, loyal, and the one-man wife of Joe Pleasant. I owed my friend more than I could ever repay. And John, of course. It was my idea to get back at Joe in the way I did. My best friend Amber, as vindictive as she is in her own affairs, thought it was too much, while I thought it wasn't enough. I wanted to make my soon-to-be ex-husband pay for what he'd done to me. He wasn't going to get away with it. No, sir. He'd pay for as long as I could make him pay. I spoke with Ophelia for a few minutes before finishing lunch and getting back to work. We had been scheduled for a meeting on the following week of our return from the trip to Boston, but the big boys decided to postpone it another day. So, I was putting added touches to my report, and I wanted to finish before I left for the day. John had flown in, and I had afternoon plans with him, and who knows? I might again share those plans with Joe. For weeks later, John and I had just finished another sex session in the bedroom Joe and I had once shared, when my cell phone went off. I wasn't going to even look at it, thinking it might be Joe, but after a moment of thought I stole a quick glance. It was Amber calling. Joe hadn't tried calling since before the day I sent the video to him. I thought he would at least call to curse me out. I would, of course, respond in kind, then laugh at him. But not once had I heard from him in the last 2 months. Just as well, as I had nothing to say to him, and he had nothing I wanted to hear from him. Hi, Amber. Can I call you back? I'm right in the middle of something wonderful and I'd hate to lose the mood. Sure, but I wanted to let you know that Joe and his blonde 304 just came in and are going upstairs to one of the rooms. And Sheila, they seemed, really cozy. What? Did that man have no decency? The least he could do is have some grief from the payback I'd already given him. No, that won't do. He was not going to happily continue screwing. I was going to make Joe hurt as bad as he hurt me. I'm on my way, Amber. It'll take me about 45 minutes. Call me if they leave before I get there, though. Okay. She agreed, and we hung up. I noticed I was trembling. I was angrier than I'd been when I first discovered his cheating. That shithead, Joe. Now I knew he really didn't give a shit about me. Maybe he never had. Well, two could play at that game. What's up, babe? Where are you going? I thought we could do it one. John began, before I cut him off, as I began to dress. Sorry, sugar. Something came up that I just have to take care of. Go on to your hotel room, and I'll call you later. Okay. He stood there, his face looking pitifully confused as a lost dog caught in the middle of rush hour traffic. But babe, we were having such a great time. Come on, stay a little longer. A few minutes, then you can go. You know you want to. John said teasingly, but I could hear the boyish whine behind it. Before Amber called, I would have enjoyed having him all night, but I suddenly felt like retching. I swallowed my gorge and kissed John on the cheek. He smiled and said something about getting together later. I nodded, but I already knew there was not going to be a later. I was done with John. It had been fun while it lasted, but he wasn't anyone I could see myself growing old with. He was younger than me by more than a few years. As sexual as my lover is, I knew it wouldn't be long before he was out looking for strange. Once a few years passed and my looks began to go. No, John was just a tool. No matter that his tool was most excellent, I had no more use for him. I entered the large lobby of the hotel where Amber worked as head desk clerk. There weren't many people about the lobby, which was both a good thing and a bad thing, since I would be able to see Joe and his bitch easily. In turn, they'd be able to see me as easily, and I wanted to surprise the cheating scumsucker. I quickly walked to Amber's office, knocked once and went in. The people who worked the front desk knew me by sight, and I assumed Shalia had clued them in that I was expected.
Shella.
You look fabulous. I didn't mean to take you away from whatever put that glow on you, but I thought you might like to know Joe is here. I hugged Amber warmly, saying, "Thank you for calling. Yes, I do want to know. So don't worry about anything. I'd rather see them with my own eyes than in photos and video. So thanks. Are we going to wait out in the lobby, or what?" I asked Amber. In way of a reply, Amber pointed to the 3 large security screens hanging on the wall. "We watch from here." We chatted for a while we waited. Amber kept an eye on the lobby monitor to check on both the guests waiting at the desk and the employees, and of course, for Joe and his bitch. I filled her in on my escapades with John, which had her blushing and giggling. I knew the feeling. John was one of the company's advertising was kids and hot as they came. His body was rock hard and his face very easy on the eyes. Plus, his Johnny didn't hurt, either. About an hour passed before Amber stood, narrowed her eyes, with a look of scorn settling on her face, saying, "He just left the elevator." We both rushed out to the lobby, but the a-hole and his blonde-headed bimbo were already exiting through the revolving door. I ran to catch up. I was going to let him know just exactly what I thought of him. And in public, what humiliation. It was perfect. I pushed through the doors and saw him and the 304 puppy walking down the sidewalk. The walk was fairly busy with a dispersed crowd, moving to and fro, going wherever. Oh yes, this was going to be great. "Joe, turn around, you lying, cheating piece of shit." I screamed with wild abandon, unleashing the hot fury I felt. I barely noticed the few people stopping to look. I did catch eye of more than one man having an uneasy look on their face as they glanced around. But Joe and his harlot kept walking away, arm in arm, oblivious to everything but each other. I fumed. I felt like a super volcano about to erupt. I ran up to the couple, grabbed his arm, yanking it out of the bleached blonde bitch's grasp. They both stopped, and he turned quickly ready to strike me. I guess he thought he was getting mugged. If only I were so kind. "Joe, you sorry pig," I caught. At that point, words failed me. The man looked like Joe. He looked so much like Joe they could have been twins. Only it wasn't Joe. He carried himself in the same manner as Joe, but had a slighter build. And his face was Joe's. Only Joe didn't have pale blue eyes. Joe's were light brown, and his hair was lighter colored than Joe's hair. I was confused and my stomach was beginning to feel like a vast void was filling it. "Excuse me, you have the wrong person. My name is not Joe," the stranger explained with an arrogant upper-crust accent. Joe's accent was heavily Midwestern. The woman with him was eyeing me curiously, but remained silent. Of a sudden, I felt like everyone was looking at me and laughing in ridicule. I wanted to run away, to slink off and hide in the deepest hole. Then Amber came running up. "Well, you caught him," she told me with a note of triumph, then turned to the man, quickly stepping up, nearly colliding with him, yelling, "You cheating shit. How could you treat her like that? I knew you were no good from the time we first met." The man took a step back, away from the stark vehemence expelled by Amber. That's when the blonde spoke up. "Hank, have you been batting in another box?" she asked calmly, looking at the man next to her. Turning to her, he said in a tightly controlled voice, "I've no idea who these two are, but I think they believe I'm someone with the name of Joe, who is cheating on one of them. With you." The blonde-headed woman's gaze grew glaring as it swung back to me. He looked at me and then to Amber. "Ladies, I've no idea what this is about, nor do I care to. It is apparent you have me mistaken for someone else. Whomever Joe is, I am not him. And, unless you want me to call the police and have you charged with harassment, I suggest both of you leave my wife and I alone." At his words, Amber got a slack-jawed expression. Her anger muted, she softly stated, "Wife? But, you look just like Joe Pleasant." I was too numb to be surprised at the mention of the blonde being his wife. I couldn't speak as it was. I was petrified by what was unfolding, and the void in my stomach was now being filled with molten lead. They both started to walk away as Amber spoke, then he stopped abruptly and turned around just as quickly. "Joe who?" he asked in a harsh, demanding tone. Amber looked at me before, in a small, now uncertain voice, replied, Joe Pleasant, Sheila's husband," indicating me with one hand. His eyebrows shot up in surprise, and his wife looked on with her expression that I couldn't place. "You said Joe Pleasant? Is that correct?" he asked of Amber. She nodded hesitantly, apparently unsure of whether to confirm or deny the answer. "I see. With a speculative glance at me, he said, "I'm not Joseph. I'm a relative of his. His cousin, in fact, Hank Pleasant." At his words, the sidewalk disappeared beneath my feet and I fell and fell. Thankfully, a darkness came to whisk me away to safety and away from the nightmare I'd created, mistakenly thinking Joe had been cheating on me, and of my own undeniably despicable act of unforgivable betrayal. Now back to Joe. "Hello, Mr. Pleasant. I hope you had a pleasant journey," greeted my French driver as he met me after I'd exited the concourse of the Roissy Airport, otherwise known as the Charles de Gaulle Airport. I quickly glanced at him, but saw nothing more than slight aloofness and a composed expression. I wasn't sure if he was joking or not, but I decided to let it pass. After replying to his comment and a few minutes of trading inane pleasantries, I asked to be taken to my quarters, a small house owned by the company. It had been a long flight and I was tired. I was in Paris, France, but I didn't feel very touristy. I just wanted to sleep around the clock. After settling in, I lay on the bed, trying to sleep, but ended up thinking about the last several weeks. After the big meeting, where it had ended very well, I was given a promotion to the international division, and I'd spent the last 2 months helping my replacement get adjusted and preparing for my move to France. I'd be heading up the Paris office as managing director. I'd also seen an attorney. My attorney was very interested in the video. However, Steve hadn't finished recovering it. My wife and I lived, in a no-fault divorce state, meaning that she could screw everything walking right in front of the judge, and she'd still be entitled to a good portion of my assets. I know, it sucks, but there you have it. The video wasn't directly important as far as the divorce itself was concerned, but its use might be crucial in other ways. My attorney explained there were a few legal options available to me, like suing my wife and her lover, or lovers, for emotional distress, alienation of affection, and the like. Such a case would be trial by jury, and there was a good chance that 12 good people could be swayed to my behalf by her actions. Thus, whatever financial loss occurred in the divorce, I might be able to recover through an award. And in that regard, the video could be very important. I hadn't found an apartment before my promotion, and when I was told my promotion meant moving to France, I figured why bother looking for anything? I toughed it out in the motel room until it was time to leave. During that time, while Sheila was at work, I finished moving the rest of my stuff out of the house and into storage, which I paid a year in advance. And no, Sheila hadn't had the locks changed, or done all the other stuff one reads and hears about when in the process of a divorce. For my part, my attorney acted as an intermediary, so I had no direct contact with my soon-to-be ex-wife. Why would I want to? I still didn't want to go to prison. Only a handful of people knew what had happened with Sheila and myself, and even they didn't know the details. Also, before I left to France, on the advice of my attorney, I hired a private investigator to follow Sheila around for a month. It wasn't cheap, but my attorney convinced me that the more evidence I had of her infidelity and with whom, the better the lawsuit I'd have. I thought about revenge as well, but everything that came to mind involved extreme violence and murder. I thought about going to counseling, but why bother? My marriage was over and I would deal with those feelings as I saw fit, not how someone else thought what was appropriate for me to feel. No, whatever form of revenge I eventually came up with would be legal, but on my terms. Since Sheila and I, thankfully, had no children, that was one less thing to worry about. Not that I didn't want a child or two. I did, but not with Sheila. I was glad we'd never had that opportunity for her to become a mother. I had no idea what Sheila told her family and her friends about what happened to us. I couldn't care less. Her folks were okay, but they had a way about them that always made me feel as the outsider. I tried to get closer to them, as Sheila was always complaining how they were family. But it takes two sides to tango. Sheila's younger sister, Leah, and her brother, Sean, although better with me than their parents, never really became too close either. Sean was married with 2 children, and if he wasn't working, he was fishing, boating, camping, or doing something else outdoorsy, albeit without his wife and children, only with his male friends. I sometimes wondered if Sean was gay. Leah was a freshman at an out-of-state university when I married her sister. She couldn't or wouldn't make it to our wedding, so I never got to know her very well. After she graduated, she went to work for a cosmetic firm in California. Although she visited her folks quite often, I never spent much time with her. On our first meeting, after Sheila and I had been married about a year, Leah looked me up and down and sarcastically said, "I expect you'll last just long enough to cheat," and walked off. I don't know where her comment came from. Baffled, I asked Sheila about it. She laughed it off, saying Leah was just being Leah, whatever that meant. Sheila's best friend was another matter altogether. Amber, Sheila's childhood friend and best friend, was one of those man-haters. She hated to pass up any opportunity to be with any man, and afterwards, the only good thing she had to say was that men were too dumb to keep for long. From what I gathered, most of her boyfriends were only too glad to be too dumb to be kept for long. Except for this one guy, Gary something or other. Gary actually liked Amber. However, it was obvious from the get-go. Amber didn't feel the same about him. She did tell him she wasn't interested, but only after she tired of him. Despite that, he tried to win her affection. Until Amber, tired of this poor guy's attempts to sway her, called the cops on him. She filed stalking and harassment charges against Gary, and he was subsequently arrested. Before they'd gone to court, Gary finally got the message. I'm not sure what happened after that, as I never saw him again. Amber was also one vindictive bitch. At any assumed slight, she'd go off and let whomever it was have it, even if she was wrong. Correction, especially if she was wrong. It happened to me once at a party Sheila and I had attended. Being that she was my wife's friend, I tried my best to ignore her outburst. Until she slapped me, then I tore into her. The result was out of one of those chaotic movie scenes where everyone is screaming and running around like there's a huge fire engulfing everything, and there is no escape. Only there's really no fire and everyone is talking at the same time and no one is making sense, but it satisfies the director's need for apocalyptic level of confusion. Thereafter, I rarely saw Amber. Although she tried to make my life as difficult as possible, which meant working through Sheila. I've forgotten how many Amber arguments we had, but it seemed any argument Sheila and I had, Amber was somehow involved. So I had a few ways to plot my revenge. Through Sheila's family, or through Amber, or both. I preferred both, but hey, if I had to settle for one, I'd go with Amber. What love I had for my wife was gone. Sure, they say that you can't stop loving someone at the drop of a hat, but after watching your wife screwing some a-hole and then braying to you about it, that kind of goes a long way toward making you forget about any love you had for the bitch. Maybe I wasn't built like some guys, those who moan and groan, wallowing in hurt feelings while seeking any way to reconcile. Nope, Sheila hammered the nails into the coffin, and I was only too glad to bury it. What I now felt was a cold anger. I'd been hurt, sure, but I didn't let it control me. Anyway, the heartache was slowly easing off. I eventually went asleep with my mind in turmoil. When I awoke, although my body felt somewhat refreshed, my brain felt old and full of cobwebs. I had arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and according to the clock, it was now 7 a.m. Sunday morning. In trying to keep my mind off my personal problems, I busied myself for the rest of the day preparing for Monday, when I officially took over the Paris office. I'd been warned that some of the French employees in our Paris office might not be too keen on having an American boss working in the same building, and that I was to ignore any negative, albeit subtle, innuendos that might come my way. I really didn't care what the French might think of me or why. As long as they performed their work properly, they could call me a clown's pony's a-hole and I'd be content. Monday was one of those days that seemed to go on and on. Although no one came right out and called me anything derogatory, they walked around with a fixed expression that wasn't unlike what they might have worn if they'd kissed the wrong end of a skunk. I laid out what I expected of them, and I even tried a bit of my limited French on them, and as expected, all it did was to piss them off more. At least, my office was very spacious and decorated in what I charitably call European style. All of the office furniture and decor was designed to give its occupant a sense of home comfort while maintaining a business-like ambience, but within the confines of, what else, a French art museum. Still, the office had its own private bath with an attached dressing room. The floor was of polished ivory-colored marble squares shot through with shaded swirls of earthy browns, brilliant oranges, and deeps grays. What I hated the worst was the large and loose throw rug behind the door of my office. I'd slipped on it a couple of times that first day as I entered my office. I'd made a mental note to have it removed, but somehow it kept slipping my mind. The rest of the week was spent getting to know some of the people I'd be working closest with and getting a feel for the business aura. It was a totally different ballgame, and one I was working hard to understand. I figured, if at the very least, I understood the people that were under me, I'd be able to make better use of their talents. There was one young woman, Norwegian rather than French, who seemed to stand out. She was pretty and somewhat tall, but there was something else about her that made her presence felt even in a crowded office. She had some good ideas, she knew how to plan, and most importantly, when to talk and when to listen. In the beginning, I'd never gotten too personal with most people at work, and early on I didn't know if she was married, single, or attached. Not that it mattered as long as she didn't let her personal life interfere with her professional life. I guess you can tell I was all about the job by then. Well, that was another symptom of being betrayed, cucked and spat upon by a loving wife. I literally lived and breathed my work. Although I didn't expect others to follow me on my road to hell, I did expect that they keep their professional and personal lives separate. Anyway, her name was Birgit Marum. Ironically, she was a fair-skinned blonde standing a statuesque 6 foot in height, well-proportioned and curvy enough to apply for a job as a California scenic mountain highway. She wore little to no makeup and had a no-nonsense manner about her, which in my book was a big plus. Her attire was professional yet not as severe as some American businesswomen would dress. I took an instant like to her. She'd been in our Paris office since graduating from a Norwegian university 2 years before. What she lacked in experience, she made up with her impressive intellect and contagious enthusiasm for her job. She wasn't the only one that had shown themselves to be outstanding, but she was the one that caught most of my attention. I made her my personal assistant. After a month, Birgit and I had developed a very good working relationship, becoming my een and I, her yang. Inevitably, some of the other people in the office found this relationship to be biased and very chauvinistic. I consider myself to be fair and just, even when I didn't want to be. So I put their complaints down to jealousy and decided to show them that their thinking was more biased than what they believed mine to be. I started including all the upper office echelon in several decisions, soliciting their opinions and advice on several important matters. I didn't just hear them, I listened. At first, they grudgingly cooperated, but as they realized I was seriously considering what they said, they began to offer more well-thought-out and better researched concepts. Within a few months, our office was the rising star of our company in the EU. That's not to say everyone liked me, because they didn't, but most had come to respect me, and that went a long way in our type of business. While all this was going on, I stayed in touch with my attorney. During that time, he stated that Sheila had contacted him several times, at some points begging to talk to me. As per my instructions, he told her I was out of the country and had no idea when I would return. Sheila, of course, had called my former office and inquired how to get in contact with me. I didn't get the full story, but from what little I was told, she'd been informed that since we were no longer living together and estranged, they couldn't divulge any information to her. I've no idea what her reaction to that explanation was. I can only hope it hurt deeply and left her feeling out in the cold. As for the video, Steve had recovered most of it, and the only portions missing were a couple of minutes that I'd not seen. I had sent what Steve had saved of the video over to my attorney, who, after viewing it, mentioned something about malicious intent which seemed to make him happy. I'm glad someone was. The private investigator had followed Sheila for 2 weeks, and his report was a bland mix of everyday events of her life. She went to work, came home, shopped a bit, and that was about it. No evidence of a boyfriend or a sex buddy. Sheila was not dumb, even if her actions did lead to divorce proceedings. So I figured she was playing it cool until after the divorce, probably on the advice of her attorney. As soon as Sheila returned from her business trip, she'd hired one of the best cutthroat legal bitches that money could buy, Wanda Kimmer. Horror stories abounded as to the viciousness and proficiency of this she-shark in court. Rumor had it that most other divorce attorneys, once they discovered they'd be arguing against Kimmer, refused to take the opposing side. Thankfully, my own attorney was another sharp-fanged out-of-water predator and relished the idea of going up against Kimmer. But a month after I arrived in France, Sheila unexpectedly dropped her attorney and began to call mine. I don't know what changed in her life, but I was set to move forward with mine, without Sheila. Meanwhile, Sheila was sleeping in her bed. I awoke from another nightmare. They were coming with greater frequency and becoming more vivid. They differed in detail, but the plot was the same one, over and over. I was in a hotel room, and John, or some other faceless hard body, is laying next to me in bed, when the door or window or even the wall bursts open and Joe, my husband, walks in with a happy, content look on his face, and somehow he's carrying everything in his arms that we'd achieved and accumulated in our marriage. Joe smiles at me until he notices what I'm doing. I try to jump out of the bed, but my arms and legs are either bound to the bed with ropes or they are shackled by heavy chains to the floor and wall, and that bruise and cut my limbs. I cry out to him as I see his face go from surprise to dismay to anguish and then to raw fury. All the while, the man has climbed atop me and begins to have sex with me like clockwork, ignoring me and Joe. His sole intent is to keep screwing me, only now it feels like he's using a long razor-sharp knife, tearing me open from the inside out. I feel my life essence pouring out of me, and I feel myself dying, and I don't care. All I see and care about is Joe. As his expressions go through the different changes, all those special, wonderful things in his arms begin to disappear, until all I see is the rage in his eyes and his bare arms shaking with unbridled emotion. I call out to him, over and over, but he stares at me with blind eyes, and disappears. Next, I'm alone in the hotel room. Not even my boy toy is there. All I feel is that a part of me was cut out, and which I now miss so terribly. I awaken crying after every dream, hoping, wishing that my life was just a dream and that I would wake and Joe would be laying next to me, his snoring, once annoying, soothing me with the comfort of his sleeping presence. The day I discovered my horrible mistake, at that moment, I fainted right on the sidewalk. When I saw and heard who the man was, I was overcome with the guilt of my betrayal and the agony of knowing how deeply I'd hurt the man I love and who loved me. When I came to, I was in Amber's office. Joe's cousin, Hank, and his wife were quietly talking. Amber was nowhere to be seen. I sat up and the two people I most desperately didn't want to see looked at me. What I saw in their eyes almost made me want to rejoin the blackness. It was pity. "Welcome back. Here, drink this," the woman urged as she handed me a glass of water. I dumbly took the glass and sipped at it. Then a sudden, unbearable thirst came upon me, and I gulped the water down in one long swallow. The woman gave me a slight smile and asked if I wanted more water. I guess I nodded my head, for she went off to refill the glass. Hank Pleasant looked at me. His eyes held a questioning look in them. I knew what he wondered about, and that made me feel all the worse for it. I had accused my husband of something he had never done, and then mistakenly blamed another for it. I felt lower than low. I just wished I could die. Oh my God. Joe. I needed to call Joe. I needed to explain. I didn't know how I could explain it so that he wouldn't kill me. Not after what I'd done, but I had to. I just had to. "We brought you into your friend's office after you fainted. As I happen to be a doctor, a real doctor, not a PhD, I checked for injury, head trauma, and the like. I think you're fine. However, you might have a slight concussion, and I recommend you going to the hospital and having them take x-rays. You did hit your head on the sidewalk rather solidly," explained Joe's cousin. "Other than having a bad headache and I just died and woke up in hell feeling, I was okay. Thank you. But I think I'll live." I paused as a look of slight annoyance crossed his features. "Really, if I feel worse or something, I'll go to the hospital." The blonde woman returned at that time. His wife. "My God, what have I done? Here you go. Drink it slowly. Otherwise, you might upset your stomach," said Hank's wife as she handed me the refilled glass. I sipped at it, taking my time. I needed the time to clear my mind and figure out what I could do to salvage my marriage. Whatever was left of it. I didn't have the slightest idea what I could tell Joe to explain my infidelity. He never cared for Amber, and if I mentioned it was Amber who clued me in about what was going on, even if it was mistaken identity, I knew I'd only make things worse. Oh God. No. I had told my family, his family, and mutual friends that Joe had cheated. What was I going to tell them now? In another foolish try at punishing Joe, I told everyone how Joe had cheated on me. I never told them what I'd done in return. "Now, are you okay?" asked Hank's wife, her tone tinged with concern. I guess my face must have reflected my thoughts. "No, I'm not. I made a huge mistake." And I couldn't continue. Instead, I began to cry. I couldn't help it. I felt so lost and so uncertain. Someone put their arm around me and held me. I couldn't tell who it was since my eyes were squeezed tightly shut as I tried to stifle my tears. "It's okay, Sheila. I'm here. I feel so bad. I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am. It's all my fault. It was my friend Amber." I felt a rise of anger and hatred for her. Yes, it was all her fault. She didn't tell me to do what I did to exact revenge. She counseled against it. She tried to talk me out of it. She was even mildly disgusted by it. But I knew better. I was going for the kill. And all I did was kill my marriage over a mistake that would have been nothing if I hadn't gone to bed with another man and sent that damned video to Joe. Joe and I would have ended up joking about the mix-up, perhaps remembering it amusingly well into our old age. Not anymore. Unless I could get Joe to listen to me, to give me a chance to somehow make it right. The thing is, I had no idea how to do any of that. I didn't even know where he had moved to. The hopelessness I felt reached out and pulled the plug that was holding my emotions in check, and I began to sob like a forlorn soul. I don't know how long my best friend held me, but finally my eyes stopped the waterfall, and although my heart ached and my stomach threatened to return what I drank, I knew I had to find Joe and beg him to forgive me. "I'm better now, Amber. Thanks for helping me," I said to my best friend, grateful for her caring presence. I saw her face was wet, and for a moment I thought my tears had dripped onto her, but then I noticed her eyes were red and swollen. She had been crying too. "I'm so sorry, Sheila. I screwed up. I ruined your marriage. Please forgive me." I patted her shoulder, and I felt something fill me. My friend was taking all the blame and asking me to forgive her for my mistake. "Oh, no, Amber. You didn't do anything. I did it. You tried to warn me. You tried to stop me. No person could ask for a better friend. There is nothing to forgive." Amber gave me a surprised but grateful look, then slowly nodded. "I still feel horrible. If I hadn't have told you about what I'd seen, you'd still be a happily married woman. I'm partially to blame." I hugged her. I looked around and saw that Hank and his wife had left. Where did Joe's cousin go? Amber dropped her arms from around me and stood. They had to get back to their clinic, but they gave me their card, saying to call if you needed anything. Amber reached for something on her desk and handed it to me. I took the proffered business card and looked at it. It had a logo and the name, Pleasant Clinic of New York, with their names, Hank and Rita Pleasant, MDS, along with their clinic address, phone number, fax, and email address. I'd met several members of Joe's family through the years Joe and I'd been married, but I never met that particular family member. It was uncanny how alike they looked. If it hadn't been for those slight differences, I wouldn't have believed it wasn't Joe. And that reminded me I had to find Joe and talk to him. I didn't know if he would forgive me, probably not, but I had to try. If I hadn't been so sure of the pictures I'd seen and allowed my common sense to leave me, I'd have reacted a lot better than I did. But when I saw the photos of Hank and his wife, taken by Amber, thinking it was Joe, I lost it. I felt the woman betrayed, misled, lied to, but most of all, humiliated. I'd raved about Joe to my family and friends, especially Amber, for years. And when Amber had seen Hank and taken those photos, I could see my humiliation in her eyes. I was a woman scorned and I have a terrible temper. Woe to me. The saddest part is I couldn't blame anyone but myself. I felt some anger towards Amber, but it wasn't her mistake. Sure, she had seen Joe plenty of times to know what he looked like, but I couldn't blame her when she thought Hank was Joe. They looked so much alike. I too was fooled by the photos and video she took of Hank with his wife, Rita. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, then looked up at Amber. "Amber, I need your help. I know you and Joe haven't seen eye to eye, but I need to find him and somehow get him to talk to me. I hate to ask you, but when I find him, I might need you as a go-between. Will you do it?" Amber sat back down without saying a word. Her eyes seemed out of focus as she listened. Still with that far-off look, she asked, "Do you know why I have never liked Joe?" I didn't know why she would ask such a strange question at this time, but I stayed silent, shaking my head no. Amber's eyes refocused, and when she looked at me there was a burning intensity in them. "When we met Joe and his friend, Mark, we double-dated for a while. You remember?" I nodded. "I didn't tell you this before, but his friend pawed me each time you and Joe left us alone. It wasn't a one-time thing. Every time we got together he was all over me. And when I refused his advances, no matter where we were, he would leave me to go find someone easy. Until, finally, I stopped going out with you guys. That put an end to that." Shocked at this revelation, I asked Amber why she didn't tell me all this before. Amber drew a deep breath, perhaps to steel herself. "I was going to, but then you and Joe got serious, and I didn't have the heart to spoil the happiness you had with Joe. But I had such a bad experience during that time that it left a bad impression about Joe, and I thought he was the same kind of guy as his friend, thinking it was just a matter of time before he showed his true colors to you, too. So I waited patiently for the other shoe to drop. It never did, or at least where I knew about it. All these years, I really thought Joe was cheating behind your back. I stared at my best friend with something akin to shock. Why would you think that, Amber?" Amber dropped her head, watching her hands clasp and unclasp, then looked back up. There were signs here and there that seemed to indicate he was cheating. I mean, you remember the night of that party 5 years ago, where Joe and I had it out? I remembered that night. I was so pissed at Joe for fighting with Amber and embarrassing me in front of all my friends that I wouldn't let him touch me for 2 weeks. Joe tried to explain what had happened, but each time he started, I either told him to shut up or simply walked away from him. He finally gave in and dropped it, but not before I'd made sure I would not tolerate him fighting with my friends. "Yes, I remember." With a slight trembling of my voice, I asked, "Why? What does it have to do with?" But I couldn't finish. Was Amber trying to tell me Joe had cheated on me? Or tried to? I felt my anger beginning to rise again. I tried to squash it, to no avail. I grit my teeth instead. I saw him with Donna Higgins a little earlier that night. I didn't hear what they were talking about, but her actions were obvious as to what both wanted. She had her arm draped around his neck, and he had her by the shoulders. Before I could get to them, she left, so I confronted Joe about it. You know me, I kind of lose it when I see bad going on. In seconds, I accused Joe of trying to screw Donna. I suppose he denied it. I don't remember his exact words, but whatever he said just pissed me off and I slapped him. Amber stopped talking and drew a deep breath. You have to understand, Shell, I thought he was going behind your back. I should have come to get you, to let you deal with it. But, you're my best friend and I still had it in my mind that Joe would cheat on you. I never knew exactly what had caused the blow-up. I had simply blamed Joe because I knew how he felt about Amber. So all this was news to me, and I wondered if Amber had been right all along. And was he trying to get into Donna's panties? Amber shook her head sorrowfully. Days later, I ran into Donna, and I spoke to her about it. She said she'd had too much to drink and she tripped, and was about to fall into some thorn bushes, when out of nowhere Joe came along, grabbed her and saved her from getting hurt. She was trying to thank him, in her own way, when I saw them. Amber smirked at how Donna would thank any man, but he wouldn't go for it, and was trying to make sure she was okay before he left her. After talking to Donna, I felt so bad about the slap, the fight, but I couldn't go to you, and especially Joe, and admit I was wrong. Oh, Amber, I wish you had told me what had happened. I blamed Joe for it. I know he had issues with you, so I thought he started the fight. At the thought of Joe, I began to tear up again. I'd wronged him by screwing John, but apparently, I'd been wronging him long before then. Taking a deep breath, I stood up. I have to go make some things right before I talk to Joe. I said some horrible, untruthful things to many people. I have to go explain. Anyway, I'll see you later, Amber. Okay, I'll help you, if you still want me to, Amber said to my back before I walked out of her office. Back to Joe. One of the most difficult things to do is trying to second-guess people's motivates for what they say and do. It was a solemn start of the week the Monday after Bridget and I had worked all weekend to finish a projected financial analysis for one of our largest clients. Bridget and I had become friends, not just at work but outside of work, too. We were both foreigners working in France, and as we become friendlier we discussed our personal interests, discovering we had many of those in common as well. I have to stress that on my part one viewed Bridget as a no more than a friend, maybe even a good friend, but without the benefits that some good friends share. I live fairly close to the office, a 10-minute walk, while Bridget lives about 40 minutes away by train. To ease her time and to hasten our weekend schedule, I offered her the spare bedroom at my place. It made sense to me, and Bridget jumped at the idea with a fair amount of excitement, which was an unusual reaction for her. So for the next 2 evenings, beginning Friday, we stopped to eat dinner and then off to my place to rest for the next day. Bridget kept a couple of changes of clothing in her office. With the unpredictability of the weather in Paris, you never knew when a rain shower would catch a person and soak them. Carrying an umbrella all the time while lugging large cases and boxes wasn't practical either. And you didn't want to meet with a client while looking like a drowned rat. Many of the employees kept a change of clothing handy. Thus, clean clothing wasn't an issue. Plus, I had a washer and dryer, on my insistence. It was Sunday evening. We had finally finished the analysis and had eaten, and were talking at my place. We somehow came around to the topic of our respective relationships. Joseph, you never mention your wife. Why is that? Bridget asked while sipping her wine. I shrugged my shoulders and made some idle comment about being separated. She raised her left eyebrow, leaned forward and asked with unabashed curiosity, "Why are you separated?" I hesitated before answering, trying to determine if I could hold my emotions in check while talking about what had happened. I didn't feel much of anything about Sheila now, so I thought why the hell not? The only one who knew the entire story was my attorney, and I was curious to get an uninvolved woman's point of view. I told her my story. While I related everything to her, she asked a question here and there to clarify something. For the most part, she listened, and listened attentively, like it was the sole most important thing for her to do. After I finished, she looked at me, and she had the saddest look I'd ever seen on a person. I think she felt sadder than I had at my lowest point. It made me feel like a heel that I'd made her feel so bad. Setting that feeling aside, I looked away from her to sip my wine, saying, "There you have it, Bridget. Not a very interesting story of itself. It's just another cheating spouse. I'm getting over it." Looking at her inquiringly, I asked her, almost nonchalantly, "But I would like to know how you see it." Bridget appeared to be a little uncomfortable at my request. She nervously played with her wine glass as she stared off somewhere, someplace I was not privy to. I saw Bridget's expression change as she focused on me again. She looked like she had reached some sort of decision. Her eyes searched my face before responding, "I think your wife made a very big mistake. I've not known you for so long, Joseph, but what I do know, I don't feel you are the quality of man to cheat on his wife. Perhaps she does think you cheated. Although revenge is never worthwhile, I can understand the motivation behind such revenge. Love is very strong, also very weak. It is joyful and inspiring, also sad and depressing. Love is a very great inducement, urging us to do things we would not normally act out, including revenge. Yes? I thought about what she had just said. I didn't quite get her reasoning. How could true love, the eternal love alluded to and praised by poets, be the catalyst of such great betrayal? I don't know about that, Bridget. Admittedly, revenge is a harsh word and it does conjure up some outrageous conceptions. However, retribution, or as we Americans say, payback, can be quite satisfying. Bridget mouthed something wordlessly before saying, with the innocent wonder of a child's glee, payback, pay back. I like the sound of that word. There is a power to it. Payback. Smiling with both her eyes and her lips, she added, "You Americans are very inventive with the English language, Joseph." I returned her smile, then, somewhat regretfully, returned the conversation to the main discussion. "What do you mean when you say revenge is caused by love?" I spoke more brusquely than I had intended to, and it affected my guest. She looked away from me, her smile disappearing. "Perhaps I explain wrongly," she said uncertainly. The few times Bridget had become flustered at work, her English would become strained, dropping conjunctions and forgetting participles, as it was happening as she tried to backtrack. "No, I don't think you did, Bridget. Please, I really want to know what you mean. I want to understand," I said with a gentler tone of voice. Breathing deeply, she nodded. "You are correct, Joseph. Okay, I will explain." I couldn't help but notice her compact chest rise up, stretch her blouse slightly, as she took those deep breaths. Beginning slowly, as if gathering her thoughts off the cuff, she said, "I am a woman, Joseph. As a woman, and I know very many women are the same, we feel our emotions differently than men. We also feel these emotions more intensely and much deeper than many men. Because of this difference, women are emotional thinkers. Men, from what I have experienced, they do not feel their emotions in the same way as women. They are not ruled as much by their emotions as women. Because of this difference, men are more logical thinkers. Do you understand what I say, Joseph?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm with you." A look of confusion crossed her pretty Nordic features. "Yes, you are with me. We are here, together, Joseph. But do you not understand my words?" "Yes, we're together. But, Amit, I understand what you're saying." Her eyes brightened with quick understanding. "Is that another American? How do you say?" Bridget's face scrunched up cutely as she tried to remember the word she wanted. "CLO? Colloquialism. Yes, that phrase is just one of many of our American idioms," I explained dryly. "But please, continue with what you're saying. Joseph, if a strange man were to punch you, for no reason, you would maybe hit him too, yes? But would you carry a long-term grievance against this stranger for hitting you one time? Probably not. Once the fight was over and I'd won, I'd eventually forget about it." "Exactly. Even if you had not won, I think you would one day forget about it, anyway. Yes?" I shrugged my shoulders in response. Taking my nonverbal response as agreement, Bridget continued, moving her head about, slightly, as she spoke. "Many women would not. They would brood over the incident. Then, maybe one day, much later, if a woman saw the other woman who had punched her, then she would take action. Her emotions would control her mind. In the same way, I think your wife brooded for some time, building up those negative emotions until they controlled her. Do you see?" I thought I detected an imploring note in her voice. I guess she'd hoped I'd understand the rationale behind Sheila's actions. Maybe I did, but that didn't change how I felt about her actions. It certainly didn't alter the decision I'd made for the basis of my own actions. I simply nodded, rather than to explain anything else of how I felt. Encouraged by my silence, Bridget changed gears, becoming animated and gesticulating with her hands as she spoke with a growing excitement. "Women are impulsive because of their emotions, Joseph, but they are also very, I think, the word is cunning. Women can sulk. Yes, sulk, for a long time, begin planning, and then act when they feel the time is correct. I think, your wife, she waited, perhaps to plan her revenge. I could not know her exact thinking, but I do not believe she behaved impulsively. She took her time, I think, to hurt you." Her last words hit home. They descended rapidly into that deep dark recess we hide ourselves in, renewing the intense pain of a previously dull ache. I guess my expression changed to something less than pleasant, for Bridget's face took on a look of sudden alarm. Leaning forward and making a motion as if to touch me, she said, "Oh, Joseph, I am sorry. I apologize for my thoughtless words." I smiled at Bridget, although I felt more like gritting my teeth and snarling. "No, you did nothing wrong. Remember, I asked for your thoughts on what I'd been through. You're merely expressing an honest opinion, and I can't ask for more than that. So, please, don't apologize for giving me what I asked for." Bridget nodded her head slowly, unsure of my sincerity. "Thank you, Joseph." She quickly glanced around the room somewhat nervously rather than to continue looking at me. "Perhaps I should leave. I can go now and arrive at the station in time to catch the last train." Already my pain was dissipating, its re-emergence. At Bridget's words, a fading spark of what once upon a time a raging bonfire. "No, please stay. It's late, and from the sound of it, it's begun to rain." Bridget looked at me with a wistful expression. I could tell she was ready to bolt. "Really, Bridget? I'm fine. You caught me by surprise, is all. I guess I wasn't as emotionally separated from my experience as I thought," I said with a slightly forced chortle. She seemed to relax slightly, but I could sense she wasn't fully convinced. I wasn't sure why I wanted her to stay. I liked her, sure, but no more than what I would care for a good friend. I certainly had no designs on her. Not that I hadn't thought of her in a less than professional way, she certainly was pretty enough. But those thoughts had been fleeting and easily ousted from my mind. "Look, let's finish the wine while we talk of other things. Then, we'll head off to sleep. How does that sound?" "Okay, Joseph. Let us do that. And thank you." For the next hour, we spoke of her life in Norway and in France, of my business aspirations, and of other prosaic subjects, until we reached an impasse in our conversational mundanity. I sipped at the wine, my thoughts drifting lazily to nothing in particular, enjoying the shared companionable quiet between Bridget and myself over the last few minutes. "Joseph, may I say something of your marriage? If you do not mind." The question was asked with conflicting tonal inflections. Apparently, Bridget dreaded bringing up whatever it was, but something else drove her, regardless of what it might incur. "Sure, go for it." A quizzical expression appeared momentarily on her lovely face, and just as quickly a soft smile erased it. Bridget raised her head to look me squarely in the eye as she began to speak. "I do not mean to say that I agree with your wife's thinking, as I do not. I think what she did is a very horrible thing to play on someone else, irrespective of the reason behind it. Your wife, she made many mistakes. The worst mistake is not trusting you. The second bad mistake is not speaking with you about her concerns. By themselves, as bad as these are, the two bad mistakes are not what has caused your negative emotions of your wife. I think you could have made your marriage work if she did not go farther, yes? Yes, I could have worked things out with her at that point. Probably. It wouldn't have been an easy task, but I think we could have made it. But," Bridget interrupted before I could finish what I wanted to say. "Yes, but your wife took a man to her bed, and as you Americans say, crossed the line." "Yes?" she exclaimed, somewhat agitatedly. "Okay, so she had spoken the thought I had." "Yes, Sheila crossed the line. And it's a line that can never be crossed in a healthy, loving relationship, like in a marriage. That is, in a monogamous marriage. Yes, what your wife did. She made only a small problem a very big problem. I agree with you, Bridget. It has only added to a problem she created. I've never cheated on my wife. Never. Sure, I've been tempted. I think every guy has, but I've never crossed that line. It isn't worth it. But I don't have a choice in it anymore. What's done is done, and there is no going back." Bridget gave me a long, searching look before she spoke again. "Are you certain there is not a chance you can forgive what she has done and return to her?" she asked with a curious tone in her voice. Leaning forward, I motioned with my hand, moving it side to side, palm down, to emphasize my words, saying, "No, I can't. It goes beyond just the act of sex with another person. It's everything that lays behind it. It's the lack of faith on her part, the loss of trust on both our parts, and the treachery of her act. Not to mention, she never gave me the opportunity to defend myself against her accusations. Sheila willfully and gleefully destroyed the basis of our marriage. Even if I could forgive Sheila, a relationship with her would be filled with undisguised disgust, uncertainty, and no little distrust each time I looked at her. Her deed was the ultimate and brutal betrayal. I stopped to collect myself. I could feel strong emotions begin to build. Again, Bridget looked at me briefly as I finished speaking, and I swear I saw a slight blush on her face. Clearing my throat, I continued more calmly. I wish it hadn't happened, but it did, and now it's all about moving forward. Never backward. Always forward, Bridget. I looked at her. I think I saw a glint in her eye. What it meant, I wasn't sure. The room became uncomfortably silent for a moment, as if we both expected something to happen. A pregnant pause. It was a bit awkward, but then I shook myself, grabbed my wine glass, and stood to open another bottle of wine. Would you like one more glass of wine before we head off to sleep, Bridget? Yes, one more glass, please. I will help you. Before I could respond, she sprung up, but too quickly, for she lost her balance. I reached out with my one free hand to grab her arm and steady her, but she was too unbalanced and fell back, with her weight pulling me down atop her on the couch. We lay face to face, and without thought or a conscious desire, I kissed her. She kissed me back, wrapping her arms around my neck, pulling me closer. Our kiss lasted for an infinity, and yet it was all too short. When we finally drew apart, I wanted more. I eased myself beside her, never taking my eyes off of hers. I took her empty wine glass, placing hers and mine on the floor. Then I reached over to hold her shoulders as I kissed her again. Her response was a passionate embrace that seemed to fill me with a sense of happiness. Bridget's body undulated next to mine, pressing against me. My mind became a brightly exploding void as her escalating passions engulfed me, filling my body and soul with a wild fire of desire matching her own. I easily picked up Bridget, carrying her to the bedroom. I slowly lay her down on the bed covers, then eased down next to her. There were no loving thoughts, no words of endearment, no lies, no promises, no regrets, as we began to have sex in earnest. I could feel our rapidly beating hearts synced in harmonious drumming. When we were spent, we lay there minutes, hours, days, a timeless moment. Finally, she helped me move off her. Her eyes were closed as she took great gulps of air. While I looked at her and tried to figure out what it was that now defined us, she opened her eyes, sat up, looked around, until her gaze settled on me. She saw me looking at her, and a hint of a smile played across her lips. But something about her had changed. The sadness I had seen earlier was back. Joseph, I am submitting my resignation tomorrow morning. I was floating in a very pleasant place, but at her words I plummeted to earth, crashing and burning. What? Why? I am sorry, Joseph. I was going to tell you Friday, but then I think it would have interfered with our work. Yes, so I waited. I am going home. There is someone back home, waiting on me to say yes to his proposal of marriage. And I will say yes. I will say yes, and never again leave him or do with another what we have done tonight. I was beyond words. I didn't know what to say. A fiancé? That was news to me. I see you are sad, Joseph. So am I. But it is what I must do. I will be a good wife to him, and if it should happen, be a good mother too, to our children. Was I a mistake? Was I some kind of litmus test? I blurted out. As soon as I said the words, I regretted them. I had let my anger form my words instead of my brain. Her look went from sadness to a warm kindness. No, Joseph, you are a good friend. I do not regret what we did. It has shown me what love from a good man is like. My fiancé is a good man too. Just like you, Joseph. I realized this as I worked with you. You were kind, patient, and very helpful. Tonight, you were that and more. Thanks to you, I have made up my mind. I will marry him. I looked away from her as her words poured over me and filled me with, I don't know, gratefulness, anger, hurt, sadness, jealousy, and yes, even happiness. I felt all of the aforementioned. Please, Joseph, my time with you I did not plan it, but I am glad we made love. I shall never forget this feeling. I will always remember you, Joseph, always. With that, she left the bed, gathered her clothes, quickly dressed, and with a chaste peck on my cheek, walked to the bedroom door. I could do nothing but watch her leave. Bridget stopped, turned around to face me, and uttered a final parting. Joseph, even if you do not return to your wife, please forgive her. If you want to move forward, I think you must forgive her. I wish you a good life. Monday morning, Bridget came in to drop off her resignation with Human Resources. She went to all her coworkers to bid them goodbye. She never came to my office. Although I knew she wouldn't, it still bothered me. A month passed since Bridget had quit when I'd hired a new assistant. She was nothing like Bridget, but then fewer. Diane was capable and very organized, but the pizzazz I had with Bridget was missing. That was okay too. I made up for it by throwing myself ever deeper into my work. I even allowed the lower echelons, the working stiffs, to forward their own ideas through their department heads. This improved morale quite a bit. I think some even began to like me, which was like rain on a duck. Their regards ran right off. I didn't care if anyone liked me, as long as they did their jobs the best they knew how. I had spoken to my attorney several times during that month. He's saying that Sheila was becoming frantic in her attempt to contact me, and me replying that I didn't care. We had already divided our material and financial assets, so there was nothing to talk about. I didn't care why she cheated. All that mattered to me is that she did. I would never forgive or forget that. It was a Tuesday night, just over 6 weeks since Bridget had left, when my world changed. I was working late that evening. The staff had already left and I was going over some last-minute changes on some of the proposals when there was a knock at my door. During business hours, my door is always open, but after hours, I closed the door to prevent the noises the cleaning crew made to keep from breaking my concentration. I thought it might be one of the cleaning crew, come to ask if they could do my office. My mind and eyes were still focused on the paperwork as I shouted at whomever it was to enter. The door slowly opened and I heard the hard clacking sound of footfalls on marble as someone neared my desk. I looked up expecting, well, not who I saw. I was filled with mind-numbing surprise as Amber stood before me. I felt my body begin to shake, whether in anger or some undefined reaction to her presence, I don't know, but I quickly found my voice. "What the hell are you doing here?" Anger flashed in her eyes, but she never changed her facial expression, which seemed both sad and exultant. "And how did you get past security?" "Hello to you too, Joe," she said in her naturally sultry voice. Amber always spoke like she was getting ready to have sex. She had that voice quality of low smoky tones, with just a hint of a promise. I was immune to it, for all I felt was anger coursing through me as she spoke. "Aren't you going to offer a girl something to drink? After all, I traveled 4,000 miles and that builds up quite a thirst." I wanted to throw her out, but my anger ebbed enough to be replaced by a morbid curiosity. Why had she come to France? It couldn't be simply to talk to me, since she had to know I had no intention of talking to her, and that's a lot of money to spend on nothing. I shrugged, stood up, and walked to the wet bar. While my office had a bar, I didn't indulge. It was for clients in case they wanted to relax, in a more informal way. I fixed her a scotch on the rocks. I didn't care for Amber, but over the years, I'd come to know some things about her, like what she preferred to drink. While I made the drink, Amber went to sit on the plush couch that was part of the office decor. I handed her the drink and sat in an equally plush armchair. Her eyes widened in surprise as she sipped at her drink. "How did you know I like scotch? I didn't think you noticed that much about me." Again, I shrugged. "Why don't you tell me why you're here, Amber? I'd hate for you to waste your time any more than you need to." It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why she was here, so far from home, in a foreign country, but I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear her beg for forgiveness on behalf of her friend, my soon-to-be ex-wife. I wanted her to humble herself. It was small enough payback, in fact. I decided on the spot it would be the beginning of a long and very painful journey for both Sheila and Amber. She sipped at her drink a bit more, then set it down. She tossed her long auburn hair over her shoulders and turned to face me. "You must know I'm here for Sheila's sake. She's been wanting to talk to you, but you've not made it easy. She tried to get time off from work to come herself, but she was denied. And she needs her job, now that you've financially cut her off. I had some vacation time due me, and I've always wanted to see Paris. So here I am, killing two birds with one stone, so to speak." Her smile was razor thin as she said that. I sat, not thinking or responding, just listening. I didn't like Amber, but she was here, and as much as I hated Sheila, I decided I would listen quietly, then have her leave so she could enjoy her vacation and I could get back to work. Amber leaned forward, picked up her drink, and took another sip. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she asked in a curious tone. I simply looked at her, gesturing for her to continue. Sighing, Amber set her drink down and looked around the office. Then she stood and walked to one of the large plate glass windows that walled one side of the office. "Wow, nice office you have here. I think it's bigger than my entire apartment, and it has a great view, with the River Seine in the distance. Really, Joe, what did you have to do to rate such treatment?" I felt my anger rising. I knew she was trying to coax a response from me, but I kept my cool and steered the conversation back into focus. "Amber, I don't have much time. I have a lot of work to do before I can go home tonight. So just get to the point of your visit." "Damn, even with your fancy clothes, working in a fancy office, in a fancy city, you're still an a-hole," she declared in a hateful tone. I shrugged again. All right, damn you. I don't know what Sheila sees in you, but she sent me here to ask if you talk to her. She realizes she made a huge mistake. She wants to save her marriage, but she can't do it if you won't talk to her. She's in limbo. She's hurting badly. I cut her off before she could say anything else. Listen, you bitch, I don't give a flying shit if Sheila is hurting. She cheated on me. I didn't cheat on her. Do you understand that, you pathetic bitch? I don't need to talk to Sheila because there is nothing to save. She killed any chance of that when she screwed her boy toy and made certain I knew about it. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Now get the hell out, or I'll call security and have you charged with breaking and entering, along with trespassing. I hadn't meant to explode, but with all the shit Amber was flinging at me, I found myself in the throes of a rage I thought had been tempered with geography and the time that's passed. I guess I was wrong. The walls of my office had absorbed most of my yell, yet they seemed to echo in my head after I finished. Amber stood stunned, her mouth open in shock at my violent verbal outburst. That didn't last long as anger filled her eyes. She began a retort, but before she could utter another lying word, I said, in a lower volume and a calmer voice, "Just leave, Amber. I meant what I said. I will call security and have you escorted off the premises." As I spoke, I stood and walked toward my desk, reaching for the phone. She snapped her mouth shut and glared hotly at me, then spun on her heels, grabbed her purse off the end table and began to walk out. Right before she reached the door, she stopped. I was getting ready to pick up the handset when she said something. I wasn't quite sure I'd heard what she'd said. In fact, it sounded so unlike Amber that I had to ask her to repeat herself. With her back still to me, she said it again, only slightly louder. "I'm sorry, Joe." Now it was my turn to be stunned. Amber saying she was sorry was an earth-shattering event and deserved a closer examination. "Okay, I'll bite. What are you sorry for, bitch?" Turning towards me, she lowered her head. "It's all my fault. I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry." At that, Amber began to cry. In all my years of knowing Amber, I'd never heard of her crying and certainly never seen her cry. For the second time in the space of a few seconds, I was stunned. "What are you talking about? What is your fault?" "It's my fault for what Sheila did to you. I was wrong. Please. It's not Sheila's fault. It's mine." Amber wrong. What the hell had she been smoking? I was tempted to go sniff her glass to see if somehow the scotch was spiked. Amber never admitted to being wrong. Never. It was the only character trait that made Amber, well, Amber. So who was this woman who stood sobbing in front of me? It sure wasn't the Amber I hated to know and loved to hate. I've no idea what shit you're spouting about now, but whatever it isn't going to work. Sheila did what she did, and that's all there is to it. If you urged her to cheat, then you really better leave before I do something to you we will both regret. I was shouting again. Amber simply nodded as her sobs became louder and heavier. She turned to leave when the spiked heel of one of her shoes caught into that damned loose throw rug. She gave out a loud scream of surprise and fear as she was pulled suddenly to the side and thrown down atop the glass table next to the door. The sound of shattering glass reached my ears about the same time I realized Amber had fallen. I should have had that throw rug removed. But after that first week, I'd gotten used to walking on it and never had another near spill. And for some reason, I sometimes liked to stare at it, becoming mesmerized, while I sat at my desk. I stared in disbelief for a never-ending instant of time before I reacted. Initially, and by reflex, I ran to catch her, but it was all over but for the bleeding. Amber looked like she was bleeding out on my office floor. There was so much blood. I attempted to render first aid as best as I could. Her left arm had a long, nasty-looking gash that was spraying blood everywhere. She lay in a heap on the floor, glass all about her, unmoving. For a moment I thought Amber was dead, and for even a briefer moment, I felt extreme satisfaction. However, I'm not a monster. So after that very brief emotional flash, feelings of concern arose, but I noticed the pulse in her neck beating under the skin and I was filled with relief. Yes, I hated the bitch, but I didn't wish death upon her. Not even on Sheila. That would be too easy. I wanted them both to have long, long lives and to suffer every day of their miserable lives. Amber was in shock, but she began to stir, then frantically tried to sit up, but I forced her back down. "Lay still, you silly bitch," I yelled at her. Looking around for something to use as a tourniquet, I saw nothing but my tie as it dangled down in front of me. Wincing at what I was about to do to it, I loosened it and without removing the knot, I widened the loop until it slipped over my head. I quickly slipped it up on Amber's arm, above the large cut, tightening it until the spray was reduced to nothing but a oozing trickle. Amber's facial complexion was extremely pale, almost grayish-white. Her eyes were closed and her face had set into a tight-lipped grimace of pain. Her long hair, until a few seconds ago, shining with a healthy luster, was now matted with her blood. Amber's body lay twitching, whether from pain or shock, I couldn't tell. I turned around looking for anything to use as a pressure bandage. I saw nothing within easy reach, and I wasn't about to let go of my tie to go find a towel. Amber had lost too much blood already, and I feared any further loss would kill her immediately. I saw that Amber had worn a slip under a fashionable knee-length skirt. She must be going French, since I didn't know of any American women that still wore a slip under their dresses and skirts. Although a slip wasn't made from the most ideal material to staunch a bleeding wound, it was something. I managed to hold the tie securely enough one-handed while I pulled on her slip. By this time, Amber had gone into unconsciousness. She was no longer fighting me. I kept yanking on it until it was past her knees. It wasn't much easier to ease it past her feet, but somehow I managed. Alternating my hands, I was able to remove my suit jacket and then my shirt, without releasing my hold on the tourniquet. Using her slip and my dress shirt, I somehow made a fairly decent pressure bandage. Soon, I had the bleeding stopped. Amber was as pale as a ghost but still breathing, even if they were slow, shallow breaths. As soon as the bleeding stopped, I called 911, or in the EU's case 112, on my cell phone. I also called building security to notify them of the arrival of my expected guests. Without a knock, my door burst open a few minutes later and several men and women in the uniforms of both medical emergency responders and police hustled in to take control. I explained as best as I could to the French emergency medical team what first aid I'd given, but they simply nodded, smiled, and pushed me aside. The police took me outside my office and began to question me. Although my French language skills had improved considerably, most of what I knew was related to French business terms. I wasn't conversant enough to explain to the police as to what happened in their language. Luckily, some of the police spoke English well enough they were able to understand me, and I them. I don't think they wholeheartedly believed my version of what happened, especially when they saw I had taken her slip off, but until they could speak to Amber, they couldn't charge me. Or, so I hoped. While I'd answered questions, the EMTs had managed to stabilize Amber and had taken her out in a gurney. I asked what hospital they were taking her to, and they replied the American Hospital in Paris, which coincidentally is the nearest hospital to my office building. About an hour after arriving, everyone left. My office was in shambles. Discarded wrappers of medical supplies, pieces of broken glass, and much of the furniture had been shoved together to make a wide open space around where Amber had lain, and of course, the blood. It coated one wall, some of the furniture, and a large area of the floor. My coat, shirt, and tie had been taken by the police, probably as evidence. I had a change of clothing in the bathroom of my office, but I'd have to move things around to reach it, and I didn't feel like it. There wasn't much point in resuming my work, so I gathered all work-related materials off my desk and left. The walk home was no fun, as all I had on was a t-shirt, and the temperature was very cool. I entered my home, shivering, and headed directly to the shower. That's when I noticed the cloying stickiness of my pants. My shoes were soaked with blood too, along with my socks. They were ruined, but it didn't seem important. I didn't care that I had to throw away the shoes and clothing. After showering, I placed my bloodied clothing and footwear into a large plastic bag, instead of throwing them away. In case the police wanted those as well, I sat down to think things through. Normally, I'm not a pensive man when it comes to personal issues, but too much had happened in too short a time not to at least throw some serious thought at it. It was near midnight when I reached two important decisions. First thing, I would check on Amber in the morning, offering what help I could to her. I'm sure she wouldn't be able to sightsee, much less travel home over the next few days. And, as I was sure she was limited in funds, I would help pay her hospital bill and aid in deferring the cost of her hotel room. Second thing, I might also contact Sheila, and, well, I'm not sure what would happen, but I'd listen to what she had to say. I did say I wasn't a monster. I was just a very pissed-off man. The following day, after making an appearance at the office, deflecting most questions about what had occurred, and calling in someone to come and clean up, I headed to the hospital. I hate hospitals. I don't care if this one is in Paris, I still hated them. So in a less than chipper mood, I asked for Amber's room and walked to it. The room door was open, so I stood in the hallway looking in. Her eyes were closed, and for the first time I saw her without makeup, and I have to say, she was better looking without face paint than with it. She had a pleasingly wholesome look, and she also looked less like the she-devil she is and more like a sweet angel that she wasn't. Her auburn hair had been cleaned, but it lay around her head on the pillow in a wild mass of unruliness. Her injured arm was in one of those fiberplastic casts, while her other arm was strapped to a flatboard and had two clear surgical tubes leading out from it, running to two hanging bags, also translucent, showing them partially filled with fluids. There were a couple of monitors next to the bed, with wires leading to Amber's gown-covered chest and uninjured arm. I was about to step back, to return later when she was awake, but I must have made some sound. Or maybe it was that damnable sixth sense that women seem to have. But whatever it was, she opened her eyes and stared right at me. She made no sign that she was aware of my presence, and I had this passing thought that she might have suffered too high a blood loss and her brain was now a vegetable. I'd read that somewhere, and at the time, I didn't think it possible. If someone lost that much blood to damage the brain, they'd be dead anyway. Now, her blank look seemed to... "What are you doing here?" Amber asked without expression. "I came to check on you," I replied in the same deadpan way. She continued to look at me, like an Alabama gator does when it's sizing up a meal. Her gaze was a cold, detached stare that for some reason had me a bit nervous. She finally turned her face and stared off into the distance. "Now that you've seen me like this, have you had your fill of gloating?" Amber asked in the same tone, as if she had been asking about the weather. I shook my head in disbelief at her response. There I was, trying to make nice, and she has to start up her shit. "I'm not gloating, but I will leave if that's what you want," I said as I made to walk away. I still hadn't entered her room. I got a couple of feet away before I heard her say, "No, stay. I mean, stay if you want to." I stepped back into the doorway. "Are you sure? I don't want to upset you, and I can see you're still in pain." She had a slight frown on her face. "I'm sure. I don't want to be alone. Will you please stay?" That was a startling revelation, and since she was acting so unlike her usual self, I grew a bit more curious as to what had caused her change. "Okay, I'll stay as long as I can. Can I get you anything?" She smiled weakly, saying, "Yes. You can get me out of here." I smiled in return, or at least I thought I did, but I wasn't sure after I saw her expression change to blankness again. "Joe," she began, but stopped. I just looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "Joe, I have to say this. I really do. And well, after what happened to me last night, I've decided I didn't like the person I am." She glanced at me, expecting some smart remark, but when I kept my mouth firmly shut, she continued. "I thought I was dead when I saw all the blood coming out of me. I saw you move toward me and, please, Joe, come in and sit down. I don't want half the hospital listening." I shook myself out of my stupor, feeling like I'd been in some sort of trance up until that point. Amber's change of attitude had really thrown me off step. I walked in and sat down in the chair that was next to Amber's bed. She looked steadily at me as I looked back at her. "You really don't like me, do you?" she asked. Considering her question for a moment, I shook my head in the negative. Deciding to be truthful, I replied, "It's not as simple as that, Amber. I don't like what you've been doing to me and Sheila all the years we've been married. You've been a major contention more often than not, and it's made things very difficult between myself and Sheila. I don't know what you think I've done to you, but apparently you believe I've wronged you somehow. So, two things. I don't like how you've interfered in my life with Sheila, and I don't like you as a person because of that." Amber turned away from me, but before she did, I thought I saw her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I didn't mean to butt in, but..." she began. I waited a few seconds for her to continue, and when she didn't, I prompted her. "But what?" She turned to face me again, but for whatever reason she couldn't hold her gaze and dropped it. She looked down. She started to say something a couple of times, before she looked at me with tears in her eyes. I don't know how to say this. I guess the best way to say it is straight out. Taking a breath, Amber continued. "I thought you were going to break Sheila's heart. I thought you were going to cheat on her." Seeing my sudden anger, she said somewhat soothingly, before looking away again. "I know. You've been true blue. I know that. Now, I didn't before, but I seriously thought you would." Her gaze swung back to me. I saw such intensity in her eyes that it reminded me of the blinding beam of a lighthouse piercing the dark of the night. "Joe, I need you to listen to me. What Sheila did to you is my fault, not Sheila's. I'm not saying this because she's my friend. I'm saying it because it's true. I made a horrible mistake and Sheila was caught up in it, which then made you a part of it. If it hadn't been for my mistake, she would have never done, what she did. I need you to believe what I'm saying. Please, Joe." I sat back at Amber's words. I didn't give a shit why Sheila screwed around on me. The fact is she did. It was now obvious Sheila thought I cheated on her and thought she was getting revenge on me. It was also apparent one of those two dodo bird-brained women somehow figured out it was a mistake. Some mistake. But what Sheila did is unforgivable in my book. I see. Well, Amber, as I now understand it, when Sheila thought I cheated on her, I held up my hand to ward off Sheila's response. She went out and screwed some a-hole, then sent me the video of her betrayal. Now that she's come to realize your mistake, she sent you to intercede on her behalf, to explain that it was nothing but a misunderstanding on her part, and that she wants forgiveness and for us to work through this little mistake of hers, to become a couple again. Is that right? I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I didn't even slightly raise my voice. Yet, Amber flinched at each of my points. Rather than vocalize her answer, Amber nodded. So, why is it when she thought I was cheating on her, she didn't give me the same consideration that she is now asking of me? Oh, that's right. She made a mistake. Based on your mistake. So everything is supposed to be honky-dory now. Amber didn't say a word. She just looked at me, I guess trying to figure out whether I was just angry or fully enraged. I was somewhere in between those two levels. I tell you what, Amber, when you get better, you go home and you tell your friend that I've considered what she's asked of me, and that I have declined it. I won't stay married to her. I don't want the 304. And to me, she is a 304 of the worst type. She had her chance to approach me and ask if I cheated. We could have worked it out at that point. Instead, she chose to side with you and your mistake. And for both of your information, I have never cheated on Sheila while we were still together as a married couple. It took a long moment before Amber caught on to the phrasing of my words. What do you mean you never cheated on her while you two were together? You're still married to her. Have you been with someone else? What I've done or not done since Sheila's sex fest is none of yours or Sheila's business. As far as I'm concerned, Sheila and I are divorced. We are just waiting on the legal end of it to catch up. Surprisingly, Amber didn't say a word, nor did she get angry. Rather, her face grew sad. I have to get back to work, Amber. I'll see you later. I stood up and left, while Amber stared at me, looking even sadder. Meanwhile, Sheila was stuck with the lies that she had told everyone. I just spent the last month backtracking myself and explaining to everyone that I'd previously badmouthed Joe to, how it was all my fault, that he hadn't cheated on me. I even told them what I'd done in revenge, although not in detail. My parents were incensed with me. They never cared for Joe, and they'd been pretty obvious about it. But now, with the betrayal of my marriage vows, they felt they'd been played for fools by my mistake. My mother was more understanding, only because she knows my temper. My dad was as red-faced furious as I'd ever seen him. I left with a better understanding of Joe's plight whenever we had come to my parents' home to visit. Of course, Joe complained, but I, knowing better, always dismissed his complaints, insisting that he just needed to try harder to get along with them. My friends, I should say my former friends, were worse. They looked at me with growing disgust as I explained what had happened. I'd hoped for compassion, and instead I received castigation and the treatment of a pariah. I was more alone than I'd ever been or felt. I didn't even have Joe to comfort me. I was beyond anguish. I thought I knew what real emotional pain was when I thought Joe cheated on me, but in knowing what my family and friends thought of me now was worse than that. I saw what I'd done to Joe in a new light, what I wouldn't give to turn back the days to before my betrayal. I'd do so many things differently. I'd be a real wife to Joe, not just give lip service. I'd listen to him and offer him comfort and understanding. I'd make sure he was happy with everything in our marriage, most especially me. I'd even limit my time with Amber and never take her word as gospel ever again. But I couldn't go back in time. The past was the past, and what was done was done. All I could do now is to hope that Amber somehow would get through to Joe, and that Joe will listen to me and give me a chance to be the best wife a husband could ever have. To add further insult to injury, John, my tool for revenge, had become hurt, then angry at me when I refused to see him anymore. I thought I had let him off easy, but he took it hard. In return, he began to brag about how he'd screwed me and had videotaped our sex sessions. He told all of his coworkers and his friends. Although we lived in different cities, we both worked for the same company, and company policy had it as a big no-no that there was to be no fraternization between coworkers, especially married ones. In his great wisdom, John told the wrong people, which then made it up to the big bosses. It was the next day, following that heads up, that he and I were both served with termination papers. Now, I'm out of a job, out of family and friends, and out of a husband. I would be okay financially for a few months, what with the severance pay. But what good was a job and a home with no loving husband to share it with? I truly felt lonely and totally alone. Back with Joe. Amber was released after a few days, but she had to wait until the wound had healed a couple of weeks before she could fly. It was something about thrombosis. In a moment of insanity, I told Amber's doctor that she would be staying with me until she was able to fly home. He seemed satisfied and hastened to release her into my care. I didn't really want Amber staying with me, but strangely I also felt guilty about what had happened to her. So in order to assuage my conscience, I took the high road. Okay, not really the high road. For something inside me needed to show Amber that she was wrong about me throughout all those years. I really wanted to rub her face in it, forcing her to swallow her own wretched bile for once.